Why would OpenAI acquire podcasts? There are a lot of theories around there, and most of them kind of like hook themselves onto the fact that this is a great marketing play. But I beg to differ. What are we actually talking about? If you have not heard, and this is potentially an exciting news for the creator economy, is that OpenAI end up acquiring TBPN. The conversation is about several $100 million. I think the exact number that I've seen floating around is somewhere between $100 to $130 million. And it poses an interesting question. Why would OpenAI go ahead and acquire a podcast? Their primary reasoning was essentially, again, the constructive creation of the safe space where people talk positively about AI. This is basically a short way of what they said over here on their official statement on the OpenAI website. And to me, I think the way I would break it down is not from this perspective, though. Because if you look at TBPN itself, again, they have a great audience, right? They've been around for about 16 months or 18 months or so. So it's a relatively young podcast. And you can read about both Jordy and John, but they both have a relationship going back with Sam Altman, YC Combinator, and all of that stuff. I really wanted to look at it from the audience perspective because at the end of the day, if you're talking about the use case here, as in you're trying to go after a particular audience and you're trying to create a safe space where people will talk positively about your products, I would first kind of like, again, this is a placeholder. We'll talk about where TBPN audience comes in. But I kind of like broke down into these like bubbles, the audience that OpenAI usually targets, right? And the biggest one is the investors. And I know you'll be like, but TohirT, why? Like they're not selling the product directly to the investors necessarily. Sure. But from the perspective of people who they spend the most amount of time really, I think, pitching and focusing on is really at the end of the day the investors, because those are the people who fund their day-to-day. And again, we'll talk about in a second in terms of potential conflicts and why and when they do this and when they may be potentially switching. But then you obviously have your Magnificent Seven-ish. It's basically like you can probably pick Fortune 50, Fortune 100, right? Like, and there are a lot of partnerships, and the Microsoft invested in them, NVIDIA invested in them, and Oracle and all that stuff. Then you have your tech bros, the folks who are really into that world, and they might be working in one of those companies, they might be working in one of these companies, they might be just influencers doing something on their own, or they might be entrepreneurs, right? And then you have your entrepreneurs, and then you have the developers who now benefit a lot from these tools. If those tools work correctly, you have your small businesses, and then you have your individual users, right? And from the perspective of like how I would break it down is the reason why I also like split them this way is that if you look at who has the most favorable opinion of OpenAI, it's really this group over here, right? Like they love the product, they love what it does, they love talking about how it's going to change the world and get everyone else over here out of the jobs. OpenAI spends a lot of time there because, again, that's what helps them fund their day-to-day operations right now. But all of this group over here is kind of like developing less and less favorable opinion of AI tools and OpenAI as a company. And OpenAI also transparently doesn't seem to spend as much time catering towards them, right? And you would argue this is kind of like the place that they need to focus on, because I think long term, this is the group that they would get the most bang for their buck long term when it comes to supporting their future financial health of the business, right? And currently this is like 90% of the revenue or so, right? Maybe 80% of the revenue, because Anthropic and Cloud are more focused on the enterprise, and majority of their revenue come from the enterprise. For OpenAI, it's actually individual users and small businesses and things of that nature. So you see the conflict already, right? They don't necessarily spend as much time. There's not necessarily as favorable of an opinion. They've shed some users, especially around the whole like Pentagon thing. But then they spend more time here because, again, these are the guys who fund all these investments, right? Like this, I think the generous estimate is somewhere between like 15 to $20 billion in annual revenue that is generated over here with these small individual users. So folks like you and I paying $20 per month, right, for the account. These sectors, they don't necessarily drive as much revenue comparatively to this, but they do right now fund or create this like circular investments, right? I invest in Oracle, whatever, invest in NVIDIA, or buys NVIDIA, NVIDIA invests in me, and we all kind of like pass the same $100 billion between each other. these individuals are more important, because what OpenAI committed to is like close to, I think, trillion plus now in different data centers, infrastructure investments, and things of that nature that they're already slowly pulling back because they realize they're not necessarily making up over here or even over here on the revenue side to justify those investments. But ultimately, again, we're talking trillions, we're not talking 20 billion at most, right, of what they would need. So that's why I understand as a business why you're focusing so much on these individuals, because they provide you with the funding to take care of your operational concerns. But really, if I would be building a business from scratch right now, right, like I would really try to focus on these individuals, because if I have favorable opinion from these individuals and they're primarily primary source of my revenue, I can keep hopefully turning that flywheel over and over and over again and grow as a business, right? So that's the interesting dynamic, right? There's a lot of kind of like interconflicts that should really be over here, but they spend all the time over here, but they spend all the time over here because it funds them and not necessarily provides them with the mass revenue, but mass revenue will pay for the future, but these people don't necessarily like them as much as these people, right? And so in this environment, you would say, okay, I'm seeing the conflict. I'm seeing that you need to do something over here to help bring more favorable opinion of your company. Start thinking about how do you retain these individuals, because they're your primary revenue source, so you can keep them for longer and longer. So it makes sense. You might need some help from the marketing perspective. Here's my issue. The audience for TBPN is not over here. It's right here. TBPN audience, and it's relatively small, right? But again, very impactful, and it's very impactful because it's primarily folks who work in Magnificent Seven or adjacent companies. They're VCs and investors in the PEs, and they're tech bros, and some of them are entrepreneurs. This is the audience that TBPN really knows how to speak to. They're both former entrepreneurs. They've been in the environment. They've raised funding. They know how to talk to investors. They know how to talk to executives for potential strategic acquisitions. They know how to talk to tech bros because they may be hiring them or bring them on the show, and they talk to entrepreneurs. They have no clue how to talk to these people. And you could argue that here they're talented guys, right? They can figure it out. Maybe, but the individuals that you're speaking to in each one of these groups is a very different type of, almost like a different podcast that you need to acquire, right? There's subset of podcasts and content creators who know how to talk and market to specifically SMBs, and SMBs have their own specific ways and specific problems that they're trying to solve for. It's your mom and pop shop, it's a small solopreneurs and things of that nature. Developers are a very different group of people, care about very different set of things, have different types of like conversations, right? It's like the stand-up is probably the podcast that you would want to acquire at that point to go target those. And then the individual users, again, it's a whole set of beasts. And I know I kind of like created one single circle here, but it's multiple different circles, right? Of all different users who have different use cases, whether it's a creative, whether it's like typing, creating a copy versus doing some research. There's like subsets of each one of them. And that is why, like, from the perspective of the way TBPN can really position well to have the conversation is really this group. And this group, bubbles, kind of like the size of the bubbles for me represent more of a amount of time they spend on those folks, right? And the amount of impact that they have on OpenAI today. So if you're trying to just drill into those audience even further and create even further positive opinion, then to me it tells me you just spend $100 million or $130 million really just to continue to drive this. You want to continue to drive this equity kind of like pool. You want to continue to raise funds because you don't believe you can succeed over here right now. This is kind of like what I'm reading, is that this is not a long-term strategic investment. And I know Sam Altman went and said like, hey, this is my favorite podcast. These guys are great at marketing. We suck at marketing. We need them. But again, you're marketing to the same group that you're already okay. Like, you're doing fine with them, right? Like, they're throwing hundreds of billions of dollars at you. Like, this is not your issue. Your issue is over here. And you don't know how to talk to them. You don't know how to market to them. Actually, because every time you pick the talk tracks towards the investors, and by the way, like, Anthropic is in the same bucket because their CEO recently went on one podcast or show and was talking there how about, with like Mythos and all this stuff coming out, like 50% of the people lose their jobs. Like, what are you doing, dude? Right? Like, again, you're alienating all of these individuals, developers including, because they're also fearful for their jobs. But everyone else over here, they hear that and they hear essentially, okay, you're trying to get me out of my job. You're trying to essentially put me on some UBI or something, universal basic income, that doesn't even exist. Basically, you just want to get me out of the job and let me struggle in the streets. Well, you cater all your messaging to these people. So that's where kind of like, as much as I understand the value of the marketing support from talented creators who know how to speak to a specific audience, they're speaking to a wrong audience, in my opinion. You already have what you need from there. And again, you can say $100 million is maybe not that big of an investment. I would also say we don't know the terms of the deal, right? The earnout rates, we don't know if it's cash or stock. I wouldn't be surprised if it's like just a bit of cash and primarily stock that they're receiving. So on paper, it might not even be that big of an investment, right? Like, again, nothing was confirmed really. So from that perspective, it might be actually a genius plan for OpenAI in terms of if you're really trying to raise funds or prepare towards an IPO or something, like, yes, these guys will help you potentially gain a few extra billions of dollars in funds raised, right, in the coming days, whether it's, again, yet another, I don't know if they're like at the VMP letter of series of funding by now, but this will help you. And if especially, again, you paid mostly stock and just a bit of cash, you probably are just getting off pretty well, and it's an investment towards that funding. So this is my thought process here. Like, as much as people are touting the marketing, talking about how great these guys are, and again, not my cup of tea. Like, I've seen clips, they're fine. They seem to be really intelligent guys. I just don't think it's catering towards what I would say long-term is the right audience, which again shows me that current state of things in OpenAI is there's so much worry about where they're going to be near term that they're like, cutting down expenses on all these data centers. They announce all these billions of dollars of data centers and they're not really keeping them at the same scale. They're scaling them down. They're cutting the projects. They're pausing the projects, right? Like, they're doing a lot to essentially slow down that whole $1 trillion promise that they made. So it tells me, like, cash is tight right now. And from that perspective, it makes sense that you're right now worrying about server availability of your company. And so you're acquiring a podcast like this, not to go and amend the sins of the past and, maybe figure out how you remarket yourself to stop people worrying about the fact that you're going to get them out of the job. You're here worried about how do you double down on the messaging, how you continue to hammer the same points with the investors, with the Magnificent Seven, with all the entrepreneurs and the tech bros, and you use the TBPN for it, hoping that this will help you generate enough cash to maybe last another couple of years as a company, and see if by then you can create something on the product side that'll really unlock this amazing revenue opportunity, and you'll be able to create a sustainable business. So this is how I see this entire situation. So again, no shame on the dudes. Grab the bag when the bag is in front of you, especially after 18 months, to be able to cash in, even if it's like $130 million, $100 million of it in stock and $30 million in cash. Like, good on you guys. Take care of it, right? Like, go do your thing. Just from the perspective of the marketing value and the long-term value, I just wanted to provide some critical feedback to this, because I don't think it's long-term. I don't think it's trying to fix things that OpenAI is bad at when it comes to communication. They might say that they are, but they're not. In my opinion, Sam Altman's just, again, as much as I have my opinions about the guy, he's a smart dude. He understands that what he needs right now is to keep that flywheel going with the investors, Magnificent Sevens, and all those vendors who will continue throwing piles of cash at them. And TBPN is, I think, pretty solid investment for them if they want to just double down and do more of that. So let's see where this is going to go. Again, I'm curious to observe all of this. We're living in such an interesting age where there's, like, again, creator economy, entrepreneurship, they're all colliding, and people realizing the value of the creators. It's just interesting to see what the actual strategy is behind it, because I always say I like to trace the incentives, and to me the incentives are not tracing back to that like bottom chart and all those SMBs and individual users and developers. It just keeps tripling, quadrupling down on that specific area, because that's the only way that they can survive right now as a company. Let me know what you think. You agree? Disagree? Comment section below is always there, always open for you. And I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.